Welcome back to the Disconnected podcast. I'm your host, Jessica, and I'm joined today by Professor Libby Hinson. Professor Hinson is a professor in the Video and Film Production Department at Middle Tennessee State University. Welcome to the podcast, Professor Hinson.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So do you think that having friendships and relationships, or being social in general, is an important aspect of human life?
Absolutely. I think forming connections, especially in light of today's world of quarantines, is especially important, but absolutely for mental health, for all aspects of life, I think it's important. Yeah.
How did you meet some of your closest friends?
Most of my closest friends I met in college, actually. I have maintained those friendships throughout the years. My best friend, Uncle Scary, as he's known to my children, I met October 18th, my freshman year of college. My other best friend I met in film school. But I would say the bulk of my closest, nearest and dearest I met during those years. Yeah, absolutely. I think you have the strongest bond. There's a common experience that you have that's so deep during those years, and you all live together and sort of are all in this living, learning experience together. And I think that becomes a really deep relationship.
That's amazing. I mean, that's kind of cool to hear, me being in college right now.
Yeah, you never know who's around you, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, many of the relationships I had with my professors, I kept, many of them have passed away by now, but I kept throughout the years. And I would say about 8 of my closest friends were professors. And many of them came to my wedding and they would come out to visit me in Los Angeles and stayed in touch with, and I would come to visit them in New Hampshire. They stayed very, very close friends. And I still have a few that are still alive that I still am in touch with. Yeah, that's lovely.
That is lovely. That's really amazing.
Yeah.
So, have you ever maintained long distance friendships or relationships, and how did you stay connected with the other people?
Absolutely, and still do. Telephones have always been big in my life. When I was in college, I stayed very close. Had a very close relationship with both my parents. I met my closest friends the day I was born. My mom and my dad, they were my best friends until the days they died. And my phone bills in college were outrageous. My dad was very good about footing those bills without complaint. When I lived in Los Angeles, I called my mother, who was in Washington, D.C., 5 times a day. My children called their grandmother, once a day. Even when my son was in college, he called his grandmother once a day. So I still am in touch with my friends, either by phone, those who are on Facebook, and then Facebook really exploded things. I mean, I know Facebook now is sort of considered, for old people, but interestingly, it opened up friendships that had been sleeping for many years, particularly my high school friends. And even high school friends I didn't really know very well in high school. We had all grown up and all of a sudden refound each other. And I had been a kid who worked all the time in high school to get into college. So I didn't really have a lot of close friends from high school. But now that we were all out, we all found each other and became really close. I have a ton of very close Facebook friends and have made friends through Facebook friends. Some I don't even know, which is phenomenally weird. But sometimes it depends on the situation that you can develop friends through social media. I have a friend I met one of her other friends because we are caring for her. And this other friend and I have become very, very close. And we've become probably closer friends than the other friend that we're caring for have become, because we've had this shared experience and we just really like each other, and we've never actually met. But we've talked on the phone regularly and have just become really, really close friends. There's some connection there that is magical. Yeah. So I've seen pictures of her and we've become really close. It's odd. It's interesting what social media can do. I mean, it can do a lot of damage, but occasionally a spark of magic.
Absolutely. That's wonderful, actually. It sounds like
Yeah,
you've had
yeah.
the amazing Facebook success story.
Yeah.
So you think that technology in general helps you maintain your relationships?
For me, yes, but it can also, understood, it can do a lot of damage. It must be used carefully, cautiously. I do a seminar once a term with each of my classes about mental health and what students can do to support their mental health. And I know went through it in your class as well. I'm pretty sure last term was weird because we lost a week of classes.
Yes.
But usually what I end up doing is talking around midterms about what we can do to ease the stress and anxiety around midterms and in general, and talk about what strategies to use to combat overwhelming stress and anxiety that college students face. And one of the things we talk about that causes undue stress can be social media. Of course, that exists. And I recognize that there's a lot that is really not good about social media that can be overwhelming and in many different ways. So I recognize it, but it does create a lot of places. It's particularly during COVID. We could have Zoom wasn't really a thing before COVID. There were some of those, on the phone, help me out, on the phone.
FaceTime?
FaceTime. There was a
Mhm.
little bit of FaceTime. There was another pre-Zoom
Skype.
thing where you could talk to people, but it wasn't really as prevalent or as well managed as Zoom is. And I talk to my nieces every Sunday, and they're little, and I spend an hour with them usually as they cavort and do piano lessons. We have piano lessons and all kinds of things. They're 5 and 8. And we just have a blast as they take me through their house and they show me the Barbies and the Legos and they this and that. I mean, it's hilarious. So, yeah. So yes, there's a lot of good that comes from social media, from Facebook, from Instagram, from even TikTok, which I still have not totally figured out yet, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like you've had a lot of good come out of technology and using technology. But do you think that friendships can have less depth if you keep up with them only over technology?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, remember in the old days, and I'm not talking about my old days, I'm talking about the 1800s old days, people would have pen pals. Let's go even farther. John Adams and Abigail Adams. Or there would be people who would have relationships that would be carried on strictly through letters. And they would have very dear friends that would be carried on strictly through letters because they were unable to make those trips. So historically speaking, there would be people who established relationships strictly through letters. So it's not a new thing. It's not impossible. However, the most successful use of technology only comes where there is a underlying friendship already established. I was about to say John Adams and Abigail Adams, they had an established marriage so that when they communicated by letter, a lot of it became in a way a beautifully written shorthand, but there was the emotional underpinnings were already there. When I talk to one of my closest friends, Jeff Tharp in Georgia, and I haven't seen him in years, and we pick up the phone, it's just like no time has passed because we have such a deep friendship to rely on that when we pick up the phone, it's as if no time has passed. I mean, we still feel like we're 12, but I always feel like I'm 12. So that's a different thing. But you see my point. It's the deeper the relationship is that you have going into it, the easier it is for those technologies to work in order to maintain a friendship.
Okay. So I know you talked about how you have some really close friends online now that you have only met online and you've never met in person. Do you think it's difficult to get to know someone that you only know online?
Well, there's definitely a certain mythology about them. No, it depends. I mean, if you're working on a project together, you're having a certain experience. It is similar if you're working on a project at school together. You're working on something together. You're creating a foundation for a friendship in the same way. And as you're talking with them, you're getting to know more about them and more about their history and more about how they grew up and what their values are. It depends on how deep and the sort of thing that you're doing with them. A dating service, I don't know. Again, it depends on how you're getting to know them online and what common bonds you have to start with. Again, we grew up in the same milieu. We had overlapping friends to start with, a bunch of them. We went to the same sort of high school. There was a lot of foundation there that existed before. Developing relations with people depends on a lot of different things.
Yes, it absolutely does. So this last semester, we had a class in person, obviously following all the distancing guidelines and masking, but we had our class in person, and you said that you preferred to teach classes in person. Why is that?
I think in terms of classes, students have a much better engagement when they are not on Zoom. If I'm talking to you one-on-one, you're paying attention to me. But if I'm lecturing to you and you're in your room, there's a lot going on. Maybe your dog barks as mine just did. And, you kind of like, what's going on over there? Is a car going by? Is, something? Oh, wait, I'm kind of hungry. I think, I'm going to turn my camera off and I'm going to go up and get pizza. Not necessarily that you did this because I know you're a very good student, Jessica, and I'm not calling her out publicly, she's very cool, but this can happen. Everything in your room is more interesting and you have less focus. I tried to analyze this because as a professor, it got frustrating. And it's not that I'm not a fascinating person, but in a classroom, if I find that I'm not fascinating, I'm reading the class, I can't read all the faces in the class on Zoom because I can't see all the faces. But if I see that I'm not getting to everybody, I can jump on the table, and I have done. I can change it up. I can turn on a Bugs Bunny short and say, okay, let's change it up. Let's do something interesting. I can figure out a way. If I see somebody isn't paying attention or is on their cell phone, I can say, hey, I need you off your cell phone. So the teacher can't control what's going on in the classroom, try to make it better, the learning experience better, can't keep the students focused, can't give the classroom the best education that they need. The students are likely to be distracted by anything. And it's not necessarily that they don't even like the teacher. It's that, anything's more interesting sometimes. And you're not in an environment that's conducive to being focused. When you are in the classroom, you are sitting at a table. There's nothing around except the teacher to look at. I mean, you can look at the blinds, you could look out the window, but the way the classroom is arranged, it's arranged intentionally in a way that you can look at the teacher. So everything is better in a classroom. And you're more engaged with me. I mean, we have more of a connection in the classroom.
I agree.
That's why.
I think so.
And I love my students. And then we can hang more. It feels more like a family. It feels more like, like it's us, rather than, oh, it's us and a computer separating us.
Yeah, it does. It feels like a family. Do you think that on that same idea that there's just something about being in person that creates that sort of harmony, not just with students, but also with your friends, with family, that there's just something about being in person that's different?
Absolutely. That class we had last term was one of my favorite classes ever. That class, everybody started to feel like they coexisted with each other. it started to feel like everybody was magic. Everybody was being in everybody else's video. We had people who had, guests in their videos that everybody fell in love with and was like, oh yeah, I don't know if you remember.
Oh, yes. How could I forget?
We had somebody in a video that was in one person in the class's video that came as a guest to our last class because everybody liked him so much. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, we had a family outside our class. We got to know everybody's parents. We got to who in the videos. I mean, it was wonderful. That class was so engaged with each other. Even students who were a little quiet came out of their shells. And all of a sudden, in projects, they started to forge relationships with other quiet students. And then all of a sudden, they were talking a mile a minute. I mean, it was great. That class had all kinds of, I'm hoping my basic video class this term is going to have that again. Yeah. And I mean, one student that changed majors, it was wonderful. I love that course.
Well, I can say that it was my favorite class at MTSU so far. Definitely was. And I think so too. There was some sort of just like connection between all of us that was absolutely amazing. I made such good friends in that class. And even people who I didn't talk to as much, it just felt like we were in it together. We were there. We were some sort of little family, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
So kind of moving into talking about religion, can you tell me about your religious beliefs?
They're complicated, I think. Okay. My parents were both born to Jewish families. My father's grandfather was a rabbi in Austria. His parents immigrated here, and his father was a grocer. Family was religious. My father himself became over life sort of an atheist, but with a feeling of Jewish responsibility that he felt responsible for. He was religiously bound, even though he didn't necessarily believe in God or wasn't sure. He called himself an atheist. I would say he was more an agnostic. I would call him more agnostic on the atheist side. But he definitely believed like we had to go to the high holidays, or he did. He went to the high holidays with his brother because it was sort of a family thing. He very much believed in family. Okay, that was my dad. Then my mother was born into a Jewish family who was not particularly religious. My grandmother made ham all the time, and they hired a Catholic nanny. So my mother loved Christmas and everything about Christmas, but she was always told and believed in being Jewish, but she like loved all the trappings of Catholicism because she was brought up by her nanny taking her to Catholic things. So those were my two parents. Okay, so growing up, I was sent to Sunday school, but my father was a very prominent shipping lawyer. And when I was growing up, probably until I was in fifth grade, when he went into private practice, he was the managing director of the Federal Maritime Commission, which meant he was negotiating treaties for the United States. And he was away most of the weeks because he was like in Belgium negotiating treaties. So the only time I really got to see him was on weekends. So being the sneaky little kid that I was and hating Sunday school the way every little kid does, in fourth grade, I leveraged my way out of Sunday school by saying I never got to see my dad, which was true. However, it meant a lot to my dad. We would always have Passover. I would always fast on Yom Kippur because it meant a great deal to my dad. I always believed in God. I always believed in the holidays, but it was sort of more a combination of personal beliefs than organized religion. So my mother also, who definitely considered herself Jewish, also liked to go out on the porch and pray to Jesus. It was very complicated. So when I found out I was expecting my son, I was on the phone with my dad. I get a phone call from my dad, and he says, I want to talk to you about something. And he had this very grave voice on. He says, I'd like you to raise the child Jewish. And remember, we had a non-denomination. My father had asked us to have a non-denominational wedding because number one, we didn't have a regular temple. So we didn't have a natural rabbi to go to. And number two, because he had a very close friend who was a judge. And we thought that he didn't want to offend Rick's, the other Professor Hinson's parents, who were Methodist. Now, Rick is also not particularly religious, so he didn't care much. Rick had asked my father if he wanted him to convert, and my father said, no, you're not particularly religious, so you don't need to. So the time comes, my father gets on the phone. He said, I'd like you to raise the children Jewish. And at that point, call waiting happens. So I go over and it's Rick, and I said, it's Dad. He wants us to raise the children Jewish. Rick says, fine by me. So I go back over, I say, okay, Dad, it's fine. And my father, who had all the wind behind his sails and was ready to make his pitch, was totally deflated. It was like, oh, he was ready with all these arguments. I'm like, fine. Now, what that meant, and we have, was that their identity is that we have raised them with holidays. They have not gone to religious school. They have done Passover services. They have a general sense of identification. None of us are particularly ethnically Jewish in that sense, but it is more a family affiliation and a sense of belief in God. So it is complicated. I guess the end of the day, that is it. It more has to do with family. It has to do with identification. So.
Right. So is that the family ties? Is that the main reason why you believe what you do? Are there other experiences that led to your beliefs, or are those the main reasons?
I also studied voodoo in college. Voodoo is an interesting subject. It's a mix of Catholicism and tribal religions. So we don't mix up what people think it is and what it really is. But there is a sense of kismet in it, which is you reap what you sow. And I have mixed in with that, I have a lot that is my precept of my sense of religion has a lot to do with love and kindness and being a kind person. And it too had to do with my father. He was a great believer in kindness and doing the right thing and being a decent, honorable person. And, that had a great deal to do with what religion, in a sense, was about. I think religion, organized religion, has a lot to do with comfort. When my husband's family, the other Professor Hinson, when my husband's grandmother lost her husband, she was very strongly Methodist, and I could see how the church really helped her through that time. I think there is an enormous part that is lost today because the church, and I mean the church in the broadest sense, church, synagogues, everything like that, lost in popularity in many parts of the country and the world. But I think that one of the great roles they play is in community and in comfort. And comfort comes in part from community. And we have realigned our sense of where community is and how it works, what family is. It's changed over time. And I think that was one of the great roles that religion took or takes in part now.
Yeah. Have you ever had a religious experience?
I have. I have had two religious experiences. Again, because I do not have organized religion per se, and because my mother loves churches, we went to Chartres in France, and it was a foggy morning, and it was Sunday, and it was before the service in the morning, and it was a foggy gray morning, and we got there and we were walked up to peek inside before the service, and all of a sudden the organ started warming up, and you heard it, and the whole place was sort of shaking in the fog, and it was so creepy and wonderful, and God was there. There was no other way to put it. It was so magical and religious and profound, incredible. The other one was in Stratford-on-Avon. And I went, as a writer, obviously, I had to go see where the bard was buried. And it was a little bit of a cloudy day. And I went to see the church, and I went into the church and walked down the aisle, and he's at the end of the aisle. And all of a sudden, the sun came out, and the sun came down through and shone just on his grave. And oh my God, through the stained glass window onto his grave, the one beam of light on Shakespeare's grave. And I will tell you, you had to believe in God at that moment. It was pretty exciting and pretty much a moment where, again, there was God and Shakespeare
Yeah.
at the same place.
Oh, yes.
We met them both together. And then the three of us went and had scones. God, Shakespeare,
yes,
and I.
Yes, the dream.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful. Those are beautiful experiences.
Yeah. You get those goosebumps and you're just like, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, is one of the goals of your religion and your personal faith to create a relationship with God?
I would like to think so. I sometimes we have chats. Sometimes they're good chats. Sometimes they're not as good chat. And as a writer, I often create dialogue in my head. And at times that dialogue is with God. And so, yeah, I definitely do believe that there is a God, and we have chats. I mean, he never talks back or she never talks back, depending. I just am sort of an omniscient speaker. So, just a feeling of somebody speaking to me in my head.
Yeah. So, are there certain religious practices like prayer, or like you mentioned, talking to God, or objects like icons or religious texts that help you feel connected to God?
Aside from the Menorasaurus, no. We're very, as I said, we don't have a lot of religious rite, but we do every year do certain milestone holidays. The two we do the most, shall we say, religiously, are Hanukkah and Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur, traditionally you light a candle for the dead. Okay, but in our house, we do things our way. And as we have lost people, we give them each a candle. And Jewish people online, please don't hate me for this, because, I'm also a comedy writer. You'll probably think this is horrible, but it means a lot to us. And so we have taken to giving one candle for each person who has meant a great deal to us, who has died, which is not traditional, but it has become our tradition. And then, because my mother used to worry about fires, we put them in the sink. So the sink has been getting bigger, more and more people in it. And then we realized that certain people would not like to sit next to each other. So there's now a seating plan in the sink. The seating plan has become more and more complicated. This one wouldn't like to sit with this. There's a seating plan for the Yom Kippur candles. And we have candle races. They last a certain amount of time. And who goes out first and who goes out last, that's always, there's as well as we can, if we can see who goes out first, because we check them every so often, see who goes out first. And so it is not highly traditional. Very Orthodox people would probably come to our house and smack us, but it means a lot to us. And we also had, when the children were little, our menorah we got for them was a dinosaur. So we call it the Menorahsaurus. Somebody later gave us a very fancy, elegant menorah, and we love it, but we always revert to the Menorahsaurus because it's the Menorahsaurus and we love it. So, we do have the other one for like guests and fancy occasions and for putting out, but for day to day, we love the Menorahsaurus. It's everything. And I'm sure that when I die, the children are going to have a huge war over the Menorahsaurus. So, yeah.
As they should.
As they should. But they're very comforting because, these things do over time develop family meanings and, that kind of thing.
So has your religion, your faith, shaped the way that you interact with people?
I hope my faith makes me a better person. I'm always striving to be a kinder, better human being. My father believed in kindness above everything else. He believed in being a teacher. He would be teaching us constantly. He was the best writer I've ever met, although very dry in his writing. And he just was the epitome of optimism, which I try to strive for and don't always succeed, but always in kindness. And so I try to follow his lead and try to create an environment where everyone feels welcome. And I feel that is and ought to be the basis of all religion, as far as I'm concerned. It's like, I don't care what people's religions are. I accept whatever their religion is, as long as it's supporting that mission statement.
Yeah. So do you think that forming long distance relationships in some ways parallels forming relationships with invisible beings?
Different.
In what ways?
Different. Because there's somebody on the other end. I mean, there's somebody that literally you are engaging with for sure. I think with God, unless you are hearing voices, which some people say they are, until I experience that, for sure, I won't know. But, if I talk to you on the telephone and you're in California, we have an interchange that's very concrete. If I'm forging a relationship with God, it's much more theoretical and philosophical, where a relationship with another human being is much more sociological. It's a different kind of thing, and both fulfilling in different ways.
Yeah. So what do you think helps people make that connection if they don't get that feedback from God or from the being that they believe in? What do you think helps them to close that distance, to make that connection and form a relationship?
Need and faith. It's the need to have that, and the faith to be able to jump off that high dive. If you can't believe that and you don't have that need deeply enough, not going to work. Or conversely, it hasn't been ingrained in you since you were young enough.
Okay. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to add to this conversation?
No, I've spoken far too long. These things have been discussed for thousands of years. Who developed these thoughts, who developed this idea of a god or many gods, or it's just an interesting thing. And we're not going to get to the bottom of it in 20 minutes. I wish we could. We'd make a fortune. So there you go. Hope this has been helpful.
It has been. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, darling. I look forward to seeing you.